Hello, welcome to the 68th episode of the series Decolonizing the Mind. Um, I will continue with my sub-series on philosophy, and I'll deal today with the philosophy of Karl Popper. Um, but before I do that, let me make one remark regarding the situation in Syria. The West is now jubilant. They have succeeded in toppling the government of Assad, and that was made easy because the army of Assad was corrupt and Assad lacked popular support. So it was easy, but nevertheless, it is a big blow for the struggle of the Palestinians because Syria was a gateway to provide one of the gateways, not the only gateway, to provide the Palestinian resistance with weapons, and that has been cut off now, and they will find other ways to do it. But two steps forward, one step backward. This is one step backward in the struggle for the liberation of Palestine and of Western Asia. So we'll see how it goes. The struggle is far from over. There have been some protests in Syria against the occupation of the Golan Heights by Israel. Obviously, this hasn't reached the Western media. That reached them, but they silence those kind of protests. But we'll see. Let's go on to a discussion of philosophy. First of all, who's Karl Popper? Karl Popper was born in Austria, and Austria, I must say, has been home to many great thinkers of liberalism, philosophers. Wittgenstein is from Austria. Bohm, some other economists. So Popper was born in Austria, was attracted to Marxism, and later became an ideologue of liberalism. He lectured in New Zealand and finally in the London School of Economics, and had a strong influence in the philosophy of the natural sciences and the social sciences, with his concept of falsification, which I will deal with. But more important is his political influence with the philosophy of liberalism in his book, The Open Society and Its Enemies. And that book came the philosophical foundation of the Soros Foundation, founded by billionaire George Soros, and it's named it also the Open Society Institute to promote liberalism, founded in 1979. Now, the influence of Popper is also can be seen in the Rhodes Must Fall movement. When the Rhodes Must Fall movement took shape in Cape Town, where they want to bring down the statue of Cecil Rhodes, and Cecil Rhodes was the imperialist who tried to colonize the whole of Africa, from the southern of Africa till Egypt, wanted to build a railway. Zimbabwe was formerly known as Rhodesia, named after him. So this is a prime imperialist power personified in the person of Cecil Rhodes. And part of his financial legacy went into founding a foundation, the Mandela Rhodes Foundation, and which is quite weird because Mandela stands for the liberation of South Africa and Rhodes stands for the oppression of South Africa. And in his speech, Mandela referred to it as this, with the centenary celebration of the Rhodes Scholarship Program, he says, this evening does help to remind us of the dramatic changes as well as the themes of continuity in the course of the history of our beloved country, South Africa. That rogue governor, he means Rhodes, Cecil Rhodes, from the early Dutch settlements of the Cape, the imperialist so-called robber baron from the British colonial period, the political prisoner turned president of democratic South Africa, we represent radically different eras in the history and development of our countries, epochs, and approaches in fundamental historical opposition and contradiction to each other. Now, But still, he connected his name to this foundation with Rhodes. And when the Rhodes Must Fall movement took place in South Africa and was resonated in Oxford, where students wanted to bring down the Rose statue in Oxford, then the Chancellor of the Oxford University, Chris Patten, he says, if people at a university are not prepared to demonstrate the sort of generosity of spirit which Nelson Mandela showed toward Rhodes and towards history, if they are not prepared to embrace all those values which are contained in the most important book for any undergraduate, Karl Popper's Open Society, if they are not prepared to embrace those issues, then maybe they should think about being educated elsewhere. And this is typically the contradiction in liberal philosophy. They talk about open society, they talk about welcoming criticism, but only to a certain level, because the open society of Patton and Popper and George Soros is open only when you agree with them. If you don't agree with them, go and be educated somewhere else. Now, let's go to what made Popper famous, the method of falsification. And I think that if you want to understand the method of falsification, you have to understand the method of validation. Validation in epistemology, in Western philosophy, validation is the process where you try to validate a hypothesis. So you have a hypothesis, let's say democracy is the best political system. Why? Because it produces welfare, it produces stability, it produces prosperity, etc. So when you want to validate that hypothesis, you look at countries with a democracy, and if it turns out that they are prosperous and etc., like let's say in the West, then you validate your hypothesis. You say, yes, the hypothesis is correct. So the process of validation is you look for evidence that support your hypothesis. Obviously, this is induction. You collect things to build your theory, and then you test the theory with validation and hope that it works. And now falsification is not the opposite, it's a different thing. So what you do, you're trying to refute, to challenge the hypothesis. You're not looking for evidence that supports it, you're looking for evidence that contradicts it. So that you could say, if you have a hypothesis, you are going to look for something that says, okay, here is a piece of evidence that is contradictory to the hypothesis, so you falsify it. And that's a way to say the theory is false. Now, Popper put this method in 6 points. I just cite from his book. It says, one is, it's easy to obtain confirmation or verification for nearly every theory if we look for confirmation. Obviously, he's right. Confirmation should count only if they are the results of risky predictions. That is to say, if unenlightened by the theory in question, we should have expected the event which was incompatible with the theory in event which would have refuted the theory. So he says, look, don't look for confirmation, don't look for something that might contradict it. Every good scientific theory is a prohibition. It forbids certain things to happen. The more it forbids, the better it is. So he says, if you have a theory, you should say, okay, you look for confirmation, but you also should say this and this and this, according to your theory, should not happen, And a theory which is not refutable but by any conceivable event is non-scientific. Irrefutability is not a virtue of a theory, as people often think, but a vice. So every genuine test of a theory is an attempt to falsify it or to refute it. Testability is falsifiability. There are degrees of testability. Some theories are more testable, others expose to refutation than others. They take, as it were, great risk. Confirming evidence should not count except when it's a result of a genuine test of the theory. This means that it can be presented as a serious but unsuccessful attempt to falsify the theory. I now speak in such cases of corroborating evidence. So he said you could have a theory, and you need a test to confirm the theory. And if you find a test which you earlier couldn't find, then that's a good way to look at a theory and to test a theory. Now, what is wrong with Popper's philosophy? First of all, he takes only one source of knowledge as a valid source, observation and reasoning. And I explain in my book there are other sources of knowledge, which is broader: innate knowledge, common sense, imagination. There are other sources of knowledge, and he takes only one source of knowledge, and his scientific theory therefore limits the production of knowledge. The second thing is his criteria are based on a particular system of logic, the two-value logic, that produces either true or false, and that limits the outcome of knowledge production. For example, if you have a theory a hypothesis that says Columbus is dead and alive, it wouldn't fit in Popper's falsification. You can say he's dead, you could say he's alive, but there's no way to examine and discuss that particular phenomena in which he is dead and alive. And I explained in a previous video on philosophy that there are these moments where you just can't decide if somebody is alive or dead. He might be dead because his heart stopped beating, but his brain continues. And when you exercise CPR and he comes back again with a heartbeat, then obviously that period he was not dead according to the brain criteria, but he was not alive according to the heart criteria. So he was dead and alive at that time. These kind of things are not part of Popper's theory. And then when he goes to social sciences, he removes ethics from science. He thinks that science is objective. But by separating ethics from knowledge, it limits the understanding of the biased nature of knowledge in the social sciences. And you could see it in his own argument, which is very obviously pro-liberalism. He thinks that a parliamentary democracy is the best system, and he thinks that liberalism is the best political system. Now, if you have that proposition and you want to falsify it, when he says totalitarian ideologies are bad, then they pose a significant threat to the open society and the value of freedom, reason, and democracy. The book was first published in 1945 when the world was still under British and French European colonial domination. There were no democracies in the colonies, and Popper doesn't talk about it. And still today, many European countries are not allowed to choose their own head of state. They still have kings and queens, like Britain or the Netherlands or Sweden or Spain. So there's a hypocrisy in the whole liberal idea of the open society. The open society is only open when you agree with them, and as soon as you disagree with them, they close the door. Now, his proposition that totalitarianism leads to poverty and misery, if you would try to use his own system, then we would only need to find one country that according to his criterion is totalitarian, like the Communist Party In China, there's no parliamentary democracy, but the hypothesis that this leads to poverty and misery, the, in China, in just 40 years, they uplifted 800 people from absolute poverty and provided them with a better life. They are much freer now than they were 40 years ago. They can do much more in their individual life. So that is falsification of the theory that democracy is the best political system. We falsified his own theory with facts. Obviously, liberalism can't deal with these things. So that was Popper. I remind you, if you want to look at what we are doing, go to the website www.den.today to see the information of the summer school we're organizing next year in July. And if you want to read more about Popper, look at my book in the index of Popper, and then you will find this information. If you want to support the channel, subscribe to it, share it with friends, families, colleagues, and encourage them to subscribe. Get involved in discussion group, and you want to make a donation, go to sandohir.com to see how to do that. So thank you for watching this episode, and see you next time.